Hi, and welcome to the InduSoft Security Settings in InduSoft Web Studio webinar. My name is Larry Combs. I'm the Director of Global Customer Support for InduSoft, responsible for worldwide support and training. I've been with InduSoft for going on 9 years now, and been in the industry for longer than I want to remember. But a long time. With me is Chuck Adams. Chuck is the president of Capstone Works. Capstone Works is our managed IT provider since about 2010. So he's familiar with our industry, and he will share some thoughts about creating a strong IT security. The agenda for today's webinar, we're going to go over a brief company and product overview. So any of you that are new to InduSoft, the company, or InduSoft Web Studio, learn a little bit about what we do. And then we're going to spend some time talking about the project security system. And then we're going to talk about protecting your intellectual property. Again, Chuck will talk about strong IT security. We'll have some time for questions and answers, talk about some additional resources and how to contact us in case you want more information or would like to follow up with us. The focus of the webinar is geared towards all users, both new users of InduSoft as well as people who've used InduSoft. We're not going to show you everything in the time allotted. We can't do everything. We're going to focus mostly on what we call the local mode security, although we're going to show you options for all of the different security domains that we support. We're going to discuss integration with Microsoft Active Directory, but we're not going to, teach you or get into the actual management of the Microsoft Active Directory. Only as it pertains to InduSoft connecting to Active Directory for user and group access. So a little bit about InduSoft, the company. InduSoft has been in business in the U.S. since 1997. We were a privately held company until 2013 when we were acquired by Invensys, the parent company of Wonderware. And then Invensys was purchased by Schneider Electric in 2014. So for the last 2.5 years or so, we've been part of the Schneider Electric software company. Anybody who's worked with InduSoft, however, for a while, certainly before the acquisitions, hopefully you will not have seen a great deal of changes. We've tried to make our external presence not changed to the extent possible. There may be a little bit more bureaucracy with, accepting orders and processing orders, but with respect to actually using the product and working with InduSoft on a day in and day out basis, hopefully people have not seen lots of changes. We've certainly tried to keep it to a minimum, and we've tried to maintain our small company approach to InduSoft Web Studio, the product. As you can see, we're the first in the industry for a lot of different things: Windows CE, OPC UA integration, HTML5. So lots of firsts, basically showing our innovation. Lots of certifications from Microsoft certifications to OPC and to a couple different vendor certifications as well. Lots of awards, including awards that we've continued to receive even after we were acquired by Invensys and then again by Schneider Electric. Just proves that InduSoft, the product, is still a great product, and these are awards that our customers have voted on, so sort of a testament to customer loyalty as well with respect to how well we service them. Vision with respect to InduSoft Web Studio has not changed as well. Our vision has always been to have a open, standard-based application that services any device on any network with any kinds of data. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through this presentation. InduSoft Web Studio is a platform that customers, system integrators can use for building solutions for various vertical markets. InduSoft itself does not really have a vertical market solution. We cover the breadth of the markets, and different customers of ours, different system integrators take our product and build solutions for all types of vertical markets throughout the world. If you've been to our website, you'll find lots of case studies about how people are using InduSoft Web Studio. Again, throughout the world, there's case studies in the U.S. as well as other countries. Anywhere from building automation to water and wastewater, electrical, all the different types of things that you see on this page. So if you're interested in learning what other people are doing with InduSoft Web Studio, then the case studies is a great place to go look. So a little bit about InduSoft, the product. Our product is called InduSoft Web Studio, like the name of our company. It's an easy-to-use, powerful HMI SCADA-based application. Runs across a number of different platforms, as well as hardware devices. You can deploy InduSoft Web Studio on a single machine connected to one PLC or multiple PLCs, possibly connected to various databases or OPC servers. So you might have a panel that's embedded in some tool or some machine, and there's an operator standing in front of that machine using the panel to operate the machine. Or you might have InduSoft somewhere running on your network. You might have multiple users using thin client applications to access your InduSoft project. You may also have mobile users using tablets or phones to connect to that application, all having the same or similar user experiences regardless of the device and the access method. InduSoft Web Studio is a complete HMI package, really complete HMI and SCADA application. Provides tags for storing both input or I/O data as well as memory tags. Provides complete connectivity to things like databases, all different types of PLCs, complete alarming system, recipes, reports, trending, data logging, events. Everything that you might expect in an HMI or SCADA-based application is included in InduSoft Web Studio, and it is included. It's not an a la carte type packaging. You buy InduSoft Web Studio, you get all the features. As I mentioned earlier, we run across a multitude of platforms. On the Windows platform, we run anything from Windows CE, now called Windows Embedded Compact, Windows Mobile, Windows Embedded Standard, desktop versions, Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10, server versions, Windows Server 2008, 2012. A couple of platforms not included on this slide are platforms that we've introduced recently, including a runtime for Linux and a runtime for VxWorks. We also support things like Wonderware for integration with their products, as well as Wonderware Historian. One of the value-added features of InduSoft Web Studio has always been our compatibility story. We started in 1997, as I mentioned before, with our 1.0 version of the product. We supported Windows CE, Windows 95, even a DOS version. Today, well, this says 2015, but today, 2016, we support Windows Embedded 8, Windows 8, 10, Server 2012, as well as CE platforms using our CE View 8.0 product. And the nice thing about our compatibility version is no matter what version of InduSoft you started with, whether it was our 1.0 version, our version 2, our version 4, 5, 6, you can take that project that you built either a few years ago or several years ago and take that and load it on top of the current version of InduSoft Web Studio, and it will just work. So that level of compatibility has provided a lot of comfort to our customers and given them the the positive feelings that they can, buy into the InduSoft, platform and know that they'll be able to have a product that's going to last into the future. We have a patented database interface for integration with enterprise-level databases for ERP systems, other packaging type systems. We support Oracle, SQL Server, MySQL, basically anything that has a provider for Microsoft Windows. We provide full redundancy and store and forward capabilities. So if you want a mirrored environment where you have two databases that have the same data, we have that capability. If you just want a store and forward capability where you define a primary database and then a secondary database that you'll use in case the primary goes away, then we support that as well. We'll store data locally. When the primary database recovers, we'll copy that to the primary database and then remove it from the local database. So all of that is built into the application, and through a couple easy keystrokes, using some wizards and configuration tools, you can configure database interfaces for things like alarms, events, trends, and process or tag data. A wide variety of connectivity to the outside world. We talked about database. You also have over 240, 250 different types of communication protocols and types of devices that we support using our communication drivers. We have 4 different OPC clients, DA, UA, .NET, and XML. We support HTML, HTML5 for client interfaces. You can also, using our function calls, get HTML pages and load them into your application. We have interoperability with client applications and other InduSoft runtimes and gateway products using a TCP/IP server protocol that we've built. We support legacy communication standards like ODBC or DDE. So all of these interfaces are available to you to allow you to create projects that communicate to the outside world in a number of different ways. We have 3, arguably 4 different client solutions. So if you do have a requirement where InduSoft is running somewhere on a network and you need other users to access it, we have WebThing clients built on top of an Internet Explorer architecture using ActiveX technology. We have a Secure Viewer, which is a FAT client that you install on a machine and you actually run. It's a .exe program that you would run. We have something called Studio Mobile Access, which is a full graphical user interface built on top of HTML5 that allows users to have user experiences like the operator who's actually standing in front of the machine. And we actually have a 4th client solution called our Tabular Mobile Access, which is a pure text-based interface that allows users to look at and modify tag data as well as look at and acknowledge alarms on any HTML5 browser, including text-based browsers that you might find on an old-style flip phone. Deployment solutions. Again, you might have InduSoft Web Studio running on a machine somewhere on a network or across a routed interface all the way up to maybe a data historian on the cloud, variety of web clients or mobile clients connecting to your application server, as well as possibly other local HMIs connecting to the application server. So lots of different ways to deploy InduSoft Web Studio. Fits, all the different needs that our customers have brought forward to us. From a licensing perspective, you have the choice on how you want to purchase InduSoft Web Studio. On the development side, the development tool runs on top of Windows. So whether you're developing a solution for Windows, Linux, or VxWorks, you'll run the development tool on a Windows platform. You'll develop your project. And then when you develop your project, you can run that same project across all those different platforms unchanged. So whether that's a Windows runtime, an embedded runtime, a CE or a Windows embedded compact runtime, or Linux or VxWorks, you can run it across all those different runtimes. And when you purchase your license, you have the option to purchase a very small license that gives you 150 tags up to a license that gives you 10 million tags and 32 different simultaneous communication drivers. What's not on this slide is our Linux and VxWorks licenses, but they're modeled after the embedded and the CE licenses. So if you want Windows, we have that. If you want Linux or VxWorks, we have that as well. So now a little bit about the project security system itself. I want to talk about two different things. When we talk about project security, we're talking about authentication and authorization. Authentication is basically the ability to know who you are. We do that through the process of allowing you to configure user IDs and passwords. And when the user logs in, they put a user ID and password into the system, and as long as it's a valid user ID and password, then we know who you are. Authorization is the process of, once I know who you are, what are you allowed to do? This is done through the usage of groups. So anyone who's familiar with administering a Windows IT infrastructure or Windows domain infrastructure would be familiar with this. You have users and groups. Users are used for authentication. Groups are used to define what you can do. We have 4 different what we call security modes. So when you configure this project security system in InduSoft Web Studio, there is a local mode. The local mode security basically means that you're going to create a project database, security database inside your project where all of your users and groups are configured in your project. Distributed server is really a variant of the local security mode. Distributed server basically provides the same capabilities. You create a local user and group database inside your project, but distributed server allows you to share that with other InduSoft instances we call distributed clients. So if you have one InduSoft instance running on a network somewhere, you will more than likely use local mode. If you have more than one instance of InduSoft Web Studio running on a network, then what you can do is you can configure one of those instances to run and have a fully configured user ID and group password, and then the other instances of InduSoft on the network can basically share that database, and you only have to administer the one machine. So local, distributed server, distributed client are more or less the same, just with the added feature is sharing the user ID, password, and group database. The other option is using what we call domain security. So if you do have an existing Windows domain, or if you have some other directory service inside your company, or if you want to create one, then what you can do is you can configure your LDAP compliant domain service, create users and groups inside that service, and then tell InduSoft to connect to that service for authenticating users and getting their group memberships. So if you'd rather push the administration of users and groups off to a directory service, or maybe you've already done that, then you simply just need to connect InduSoft to that domain service, and we will use it. So I'll show you an example of all of these as we go through the next little section. Before we do that, let's talk a little bit more about users. Users, as I mentioned, are used for authentication. They're used in development tool. So as you develop your project, you can create individual users. You can also create users during runtime. So as you're running your project, you can create features in your project where users can create other users or change passwords or block or unblock users. Users don't have much configuration associated with them. Basically, you have a username, a password, an optional full name, and one or more groups that the user belongs to. Groups, on the other hand, have more configuration options. As I mentioned, they're used for authorization. Groups define security rights, so sort of functional privileges that users are allowed to do, as well as they define security access levels that users have access to when they run your project. Groups are created during the development time. You cannot create new groups at runtime, so any groups that you require need to be created before you commission your project. Password policy is defined at the group level, so if you want to define a password policy for various users, you can do that. Auto log off and auto log up is also configured at the group level. So if you need to define strategies or policies for when users get logged off automatically, or if they put their password in incorrectly, whether they get locked up automatically. So I'm going to break here and just run into a little demo to show you all of these different features that we've talked about. So I'm going to basically go to the InduSoft development environment. So if anybody is new to this webinar and they've not used InduSoft in the past, this is what the development environment looks like. It's basically a Windows-style application with a ribbon menu at the top and different window frames with different functions built into them. The parts of the development environment that you're going to use for configuring your project security are on the project ribbon. So in the project ribbon, you have a group called Security System, and in the group called Security System, you have Configure and you have Log On. In the Project Explorer, over on the far left, in the Windows Explorer-like interface, you have 4 tabs at the bottom. You have Global, Graphics, Tasks, and Com. On the Global tab, you have a Security folder, and you can also configure security on the Security folder as well. The first time you want to, or you go to configure the security for your project, a project security system wizard is going to open. So if you go to the project ribbon and click configure, then you get the wizard dialog open up. Like many dialogues or many wizards, it's going to go through a step-by-step approach for configuring your security. First thing it does, it shows you what you currently have. By default, security is not enabled. So if you want to enable, which presumably is the reason we're here, then you would enable it. So if you click next, you simply go and enable the security system. You click next again, you have to pick the security mode. So we're going to start with local, and then we're going to go and explore distributed and domain mode in a little bit. So I'm going to take the default of local mode. And the next thing the wizard walks you through is creating groups. Why groups instead of users? Well, as you develop your project, what we want you to be sort of thinking about is what are the individual groups of people needing to do for your project? Rather than individual humans, what are the groups of people? So sort of functional groups, operators, supervisors, reporting people, administrators, engineers. So what are the groups of people that need to use the project or are going to use the project, and what are those groups of people going to be allowed to do? So as you think about security, we want you to think about groups rather than individual humans or individual users. So when you're ready to configure a group, you can click the button that says Create and Configure Groups, and you get the Group Account dialog opening up. Notice there's one group already created called Guest. In InduSoft Web Studio, there's something called the default user. The default user belongs to a default group. Both of those are called Guest. You can change those if you want, or you can just continue to use the Guest, user, and group. I will tell you that the Guest, user, and group has basically full permissions to both use and develop the project. If they didn't, we wouldn't have gotten this far. If you want to create other users that have permission to develop or use the project and you want to take privileges away from Guest, then I would encourage you to do that. I would encourage you to maybe wait until you're ready to commission your project before you do that. That way you're not switching users back and forth to go to administrator user, run the project, and then have to go back to administrator user. If you leave Guest with full permissions, then it'll just make development a little bit simpler, and you're not having to put in passwords a lot as you develop the project. But certainly before you commission it, the best practices would dictate that you go into the Guest group or whatever your default group is if you decide to change it, and make sure that it has the minimal set of permissions that are required by your particular application. If you want to create a new group, you just click the button called New up in the upper right, and you give it a name. So if we wanted to create a group of users called operators, I just create a group called operators, and then I decide what privileges or what rights that group of users has. So the group dialog is broken up into two halves. The top half has runtime access, the bottom half is engineering access. So if you're building a group of operators that are the people who stand in front of the machine sort of running it all day, then they're most likely not also the people who are developing the project or changing the project. So one of the first things I'd probably do on the operators group is I would come down here at the bottom and I would start taking away all the different engineering or development privileges that this group might have. So operators basically can't do anything at the engineering layer. And then you need to decide what are operators allowed to do at the runtime layer. So can an operator start the project if it's not already started? Can an operator close the project? Well, if the operator is the person standing in front of the thing and they're just supposed to use it, then I might argue that the operator can't stop it. Maybe someone else has to stop it, like an engineer. So I'll come over and take the closed project permissions away. Database Spy. If you're new to InduSoft Web Studio, Database Spy is a tool that allows you to inspect, tag, or process data as well as change it. By default, that's not enabled. So again, for an operator, probably not something that I want them to do, so I'll leave that option disabled. Task switching. Task switching in Windows is basically defined by using the Alt-Tab key to switch between applications, or using the Windows key on the keyboard to open up the taskbar or the Windows Start menu to allow people to run different applications. Again, if you're an operator standing in front of this machine and what you're supposed to do all day is operate the machine, then I may not want you to run other applications. I don't want you to be able to open up a browser and start browsing the web for different things. So I would take away the task switching capability. For the same reason, in the next column, we have something called the Windows Task Manager. So if I'm not going to let them run other applications, then I don't want them to be able to open the Windows Task Manager to allow them to switch applications that way, or even kill my application if they have that level of Windows permissions. So I would also take the Windows Task Manager permissions away. Now notice when you take that away, you get this little dialog box that says, hey, if you're going to take this privileges away, then InduSoft, the application, the runtime application itself needs to run with what's known as elevated privileges. This is done by right-clicking the InduSoft runtime application and picking Run as Administrator. This is different than just logging in as an administrator. Logging in as an administrator does not give you elevated permissions. You actually have to click the Run as Administrator to get the elevated privileges. So make sure that you do that. Or you can just turn off user account control, user access control, but that potentially opens up some other security issues that you might not want to enable. There's some other features like enable remote security system and remote debugging. That is off by default. Again, this allows someone to remotely connect to the runtime to look at what's going on. Again, if I'm an operator, probably don't want those users to do that. And then we have something called a runtime group. The runtime group by default is not enabled. If you are going to allow users to create other users during runtime, then the runtime group basically says whether or not this particular group, in the case of this example, the group called operators, can be used when creating new users. So if you're going to be able to create new users during runtime and you want to be able to create operators, then you need to make sure that the operators group has the runtime group selected. The next two privileges, web thin client access and secure viewer access, basically says whether or not members of this group are allowed to connect using any of our client interfaces remotely. So again, if I'm an operator and I'm the person standing in front of it, I'm probably not the same person sitting at my desk who needs to have remote access. So for an operator group, I would probably take those privileges away as well, which leaves the last privilege called edit security system. This goes hand in hand with the runtime group privilege. If you're going to configure features in your project where other users can create new users or change passwords or block users, then those users need to have the edit security system privilege. Again, if I'm an operator and all I'm doing is running the machine, I'm more than likely not the person who's also creating new users. That might be relegated to an engineering task or a supervisor task. So from an operator perspective, I'm also going to take the edit security system privilege away. So basically, as an operator, all I can do is run the project if it's not already started, and that's about it. Now, there's also these things called security levels. And you'll notice there's runtime security levels and engineering security levels. I'm going to talk about the runtime security levels because that's what applies to what we're trying to do from a runtime perspective. And what this allows me to do is it allows me to basically assign security access levels to different groups and then use those access levels as I build my project to secure different features or objects of my project. So if I'm an operator and an operator has no special privileges, then what I would probably do is I would change the security level of the operator to just be 0. 0 is the default for any objects or features that I build inside my project. So unless I do something special to exclude the operator is basically going to be able to do anything I allow them to do in my project. So I'm going to create another group. I'll call this group administrators. And we'll say administrators, are the people who can do anything. By default, I'm going to give them all the different rights. I'll also give them the capability to access the database spy, maybe enable debugging, remote debugging tools and remote access tools. But I'm not going to enable them as a runtime group. Administrators should be a very controlled group of people. If you're going to have a group that has full access to everything, you want to have pretty tight control over that. So while I may allow different users to create new users, I don't want them to be able to create new administrative users. Any new administrative users, I want some human to go into the development tool to actually create that user. So I want a little bit more thought behind it. So if you don't want to be able to create runtime users that are administrators, and make sure you uncheck that box. Otherwise, I'm going to leave all the features enabled. So I have operators, I have administrators that can do everything. And then I might have a middle tier of people. We'll call them foremen, maybe supervisors. And let's say the foreman can do pretty much anything during the runtime side, but I'm not going to let them have engineering access. So I'm not going to let them to change screens, change worksheets, change tag configurations. Maybe I'll let them use the database spy, but I'm not going to let them have remote access. Maybe I'll let them be a runtime group. Maybe I can create other foremen at runtime. And let's say that I'm going to create specific features in my application for the actual foreman group. If that's true, then I need to assign a security level for foreman. So I'm going to give them a level of 20. Now, you can actually give them a range. You can say 0 to 20 or 0 to 100 or 10 to 20. And that's what you used to have to do in older versions of InduSoft Web Studio, because older versions of InduSoft Web Studio basically had a one-to-one correspondence between users and groups. And if you wanted to create any kind of group hierarchy, like operators, supervisors, plant operators, engineers, calibration, you had to create this little hierarchy of levels where an operator maybe had a range of 0 to 10, and supervisors had 0 to 20, and plant managers had 0 to 30. So basically you had this little inheritance type thing. Well, you don't have to do that anymore using InduSoft Web Studio, because if you have a user that needs to belong to more than one group, you just put that user in more than one group. Again, sort of modeling after the Windows security model. So rather than define a specific range for the foreman, I'm going to give them a range of 20, which basically means that any object that has an access level of 20, they have permission to. Now, you might wonder what happens to the objects that have an access level of 0, well, everybody gets 0. You can't take it away. So basically, by giving the foreman an access level of 20, I'm basically giving them 0 plus 20. So I create these different groups, so now I have operators, I have administrators, I have foremen. When you create a group, you can also define advanced settings for that group using the Advanced button. So in the Advanced button, you can define the password strength, the password aging. You can define auto log off, log out. So if you wanted to have foremen have a strong password, where they have to have, passwords that are at least 8 characters long and one of each different type of special character. You want the passwords to be case sensitive. By default, the passwords are not case sensitive. So if you want to define a password policy for anyone that's in the foreman group, then you can do that. If you want to say that the password is going to expire in 90 days and they need to reset that, then just set the password aging. E-signature is a capability inside our application that allows you to pop up a dialog box that will challenge the user for their credentials whenever they perform some sort of action. So if you want to enable e-signature and you want users to basically have a specific amount of time before they put in a password correctly, then you would set an e-signature timeout, like maybe 1 minute. Disable e-signature is a way to disable that whole e-signature function for a group of users. In my mind, as a best practice, you're setting up e-signature because you want to basically track what users are doing, and you want to have to make them authenticate when they do something. So disabling e-signature is something I would not recommend, but if you want to do that, you can. And then for any group of users, you also have the ability to automatically log them out after a certain amount of time, as well as lock their account up if they put in their password incorrectly. So if you want to log off a user after 15 minutes of inactivity or 15 minutes after they've logged on, then specify a time in the log off after field and specify whether you want that beginning from the time they log on or last action. If they are using a web interface, the default is to disconnect them. And that's good. That's probably what most people want, because when you have the web session logged in, you're basically using up one of your client licenses. And all of our client licenses are concurrent users, so if someone's logged in, walked away from their desk to go to lunch, and they're using one of those web client licenses, that means someone else cannot use it. So if you want to set up an auto log off of 15 minutes, then it's probably a good idea to disconnect them to free up that client license as well. If someone puts in an incorrect password, by default they can try as many times as they want, and we're not going to do anything special. If you want to change that behavior, then you want to enable the account lockup and tell us how many retries people have. So if you want to lock someone's account after they've tried and failed 3 times, then enable account lockup and put 3 in the lockup account after field. And if you don't make any other changes, their account will be locked until someone manually unlocks it. If you want to let them try again after 30 minutes or after 60 minutes or some period of time, then add a time value in the reset counter field, and they'll be able to retry again in 30 minutes. So you have all these capabilities, and these are at the group level privileges, as well as password policy and auto log off, auto log out. So we create groups. The next thing we would do is create users. By default, there's one user called guest. If you want to create new users, you just click new. I'll create a user called Larry. If you want to give it a full name, you can. That's entirely optional. We don't use the full name field for anything. It's strictly for your documentation purposes, or you can use it inside your project, maybe to display a label on a field. Define a password for a user. Since I didn't define a password policy for operators, if I assign Larry to the operators group, then I could actually give Larry no password if I wanted to. So you want to make sure that if you want people to use passwords, you need to enforce the password policy. So I'll define a user called Larry, make him an operator. I'll create one more user called Chuck, since Chuck is an IT guy. I'm going to make him the administrator. And If I wanted to, I can also put Chuck like in the foreman's group or even the operator's group. So Chuck can belong to as many groups as he needs to belong to do his job based on what he needs to do. So I click Next again. It shows me what I've accomplished. I've enabled the security system. I'm using local mode. I have 3 users and 4 groups. And I click Finish, and now my project security is enabled. In order to verify that, I can go to the Project Explorer and expand the security folder. I can look at groups. I can look at users. If I want to edit a group or a user, I simply need to double-click on it, or I can right-click and pick Properties. So if you want to come and edit users or groups after you've created them, then you can do that. If you want to create new users and groups, you can right-click on the folder. That'll open up the group policy, and you just click New. Same thing with users. If you want to enable security in your project, the next task would be doing things like creating a logon button, doing things like enabling security on different objects. So if you created a screen, for example, and you wanted to create a button on a screen, and you wanted to name that button Logon, then you can go to the command option of that button, and either using VBScript or our built-in language, you can call the function called logon, and what that'll do is that'll basically pop up a logon box that allows users to log on. If you want to create users on the fly, you can create another button. Call it Create User. Run a command, again using built-in language of VBScript. There's a built-in function called Create User that you can use to create a user, and it'll pop up a dialog box very similar to the one that's in the development environment that'll allow you to create a new user, create a new user, assign that user to any runtime groups that you've defined, etc. If you want to protect some piece of your application, so let's say that you had a button that you only want to allow foremen to be able to click, then you create a button, you give it some sort of command, and in the command properties, if you click Config, then you're going to find a field down in the lower right-hand corner called Security. By default, it defaults to 0, like all objects, but if I want to change the security of this object to 20, then this object can only be used by groups of people that have the security level 20. So that means an operator would not be able to push this button. They would see the button when they open this particular screen, but it would be grayed out and it would not operate for them. The same thing would apply if you had a push button or a radio button or a checkbox. If you created a checkbox on your screen and you look at the checkbox, you'll find a security field. If you wanted to restrict this checkbox to only foremen, then you could give it a security level of 20. Notice also that the checkbox has an e-sign. Okay? All controls that have some sort of control built into them have e-signature capabilities. So if you enable the e-sign feature for this, when someone checks the box, firstly, they have to be a foreman. Secondly, they have to be able to put in their credentials. If they don't do that, then it's going to cancel the operation. So you can control individual objects. You can also control things at a screen layer. So if you open the screen attributes of the screen, you'll see that there's a security level on the screen attributes as well. It defaults to 0, but if you wanted to change this to 20, then basically what this means is if an operator tried to open the screen, it would give them an access denied message, or if a foreman tried to open the screen or anyone else who had a security level of 20, then the screen would open and they'd be able to use the various controls. So if you want to control things at a functional level, then you'll define the access rights for the group. If you want to define or control individual objects or screens, then you'll use the access levels. You'll define them at the group level, and then you'll define them on the individual objects as well. Jumping back to the presentation for a minute, there are other security settings that you may want access to. You may want to change the security mode. You may set what we call a main password. You may want to back up or restore your security system or edit users and groups again. If you want to do that, if you go back to the project ribbon and click Configure, instead of getting the wizard, you're going to get what we call the security system dialog. In the security system dialog, I can disable security if I just want to turn it off. I can do what we call set a main password. The main password basically protects the security system. So if you have your security system fully configured and you want to save it so that other people can't change it, then you want to set a password. And you'll just type a password in here. Type the same password. And then the next time you try to open up the security system configuration or change a user or a group, then you'll be challenged for the security system password. And if you put the password in correctly, then you can edit the security system. So again, I would encourage you to do that. I would encourage you to do that probably at the end of your development cycle. Otherwise, if you're making a lot of changes to your security system, you're going to be putting in your password over and over again, and that might not be something you want to do. So the best practice is definitely to set a main password, but the best practice also would be to set that once your security system is largely configured and you're not making lots of changes. Once you do have your security system finished and configured, there's a button over here labeled Backup. The button labeled Backup allows you to export your security system to a file. So if you click the Export to File button, a file browser will pop up. You can type in some file name like, Security System Export. Click Save, and it saves a file that then you can import if you ever need to re-import your security system. So if something bad happens and you need to start over, or you want to start over on your project, or you want to copy your security system from one project to another, just do a backup and save it in case you ever need it, or use it to import into a new application so that your different applications have the same security. If you want to edit users or groups, you can do this right here from the account management. If you want to change the default user, you simply create some other user besides guest, maybe a user called unknown, and make that the default user instead. The virtual keyboard allows you to pop up a virtual keyboard if you're using a touch screen. If you're using user IDs and groups, I would encourage you to do that and set it to alphanumeric, assuming you're using alphanumeric group names and passwords. Finally, you can change the security mode. The default is local mode, and that's what we've used up to this point. However, if you want to use the distributed mode and you want to be the distributed server, you simply change from local to distributed server, and you're done. That's the only thing you need to do. Again, local and distributed server are basically the same. The only difference is the distributed server mode listens for connections from other InduSoft instances. If you are one of those other InduSoft instances and you want to be a distributed client, then you will click the distributed client. You'll put the IP address of the security server. You'll pick the server IP port, which defaults to 1234, but you can change that through the project communication settings. Define a couple options for connection timeout, synchronization period, which means how long or how often the two different InduSoft instances talk to each other to synchronize. And then you have some fields down here that you can use to force a cache reload, for example. The way that works is you put a tag in the force cache reload field, and this is a trigger. And like other InduSoft triggers, you simply change this value, and it will force a cache reload. So if for some reason you think your security client is not synchronized with the server, you can force that by toggling this tag. If you want to get the status of the current distributed client, then create a tag, put it in the status tag field, and that will be some integer value that says whether it's connected, whether it's not connected, whether it's synchronized, whether it's not synchronized, and you can monitor the status. You need to put in some user ID and password of a user on the security server that has remote access. So that little box that we checked that said allow remote access, you need to have some user that has that privilege in order for the client to connect. So you need to put in some username and password that has that privilege. If you want to use domain security is pretty simple as well. Again, we're not going to get into the mechanics of how do I manage a Windows domain, but if you already have a Windows domain and you want to connect to it, then you simply say, I want to use domain security, and then pick server settings and tell us what domain you want to connect to. Give us the user ID and password of a Windows user, so not an InduSoft user, but a Windows user that you want to connect to. And you're done. If you want to verify if it's going to work, you can click the check connection. If for some reason you get a problem, like in this case, I'm not on the same network as in my domain, so it can't automatically find it, then what you can do is you can go to the LDAP advanced settings. There's lots of advanced settings that you can use to define the server IP or connect to a Microsoft product called Atom for lightweight security services. But in my case, I'm just going to put in the IP address of what I know to be the domain controller. I can click OK. Now it can connect. I can click OK again, click OK again, and what we'll see is now if I go look at users and groups, I have a whole bunch of Windows groups, I have a whole bunch of Windows users, and if I click on any one of these users, I can see, this is why you want to put your password in last, I can see the group memberships. Notice the little buttons are grayed out though. I can't manage the group membership. I can't change the user password. All of that is done in Windows Active Directory. And what InduSoft does is basically use Windows Active Directory features to authenticate users and get the group membership. Now, it only gets the group membership. So this user happened to belong to a group called the InduSoft QA group. So if I actually want to hand privileges off to the InduSoft QA group, then I need to do that by first removing the default rights. Every group has a default set of rights, they're sort of minimal. And assign privileges and assign lockup criteria, assign security levels, just like you would for a built-in group. So if you want to use domain security, then you can use domain security, assuming you have a Windows domain defined. There are lots of different resources you can use when you develop your project. There's a ton of different built-in functions that you can use. We looked at log on, we looked at create users. There's lots of other ones that you can use as you develop your project. There's also some system level tags that you can use. Username and group name give you the name of the current user that's logged in, and group name gives you a group membership separated by semicolons if the user belongs to more than one group. We have two tags called group low level and group high level. Those are legacy and largely deprecated in the latest versions of our product. We recommend that you use the check security level function now in lieu of the group level high and group low level tags. Now, once you've got your application developed, and let's say you've created lots of cool stuff, cool graphics, or you have proprietary algorithms that you use to do different math and different calculations, if you want to protect that from your competitors or protect it from end users from changing things, then we have an encryption mechanism built into the product where you can define an encryption key and password protect various files that you care about. So if I go back and save this screen that I created. So I'm going to call it main, and let's say that I want to protect this screen because it's got cool buttons on it. If I right-click on main, I have a little right-click menu that has an option for password protection. And if I click password protection, it's going to prompt me for password, and I can type in some password and click OK. And what that's done now is it's encrypted my screen such that whenever I try to open this screen again, it's going to prompt me for my password before I can enter it in. And if I can't put in my password correctly, it's not going to open. Even if I copy this screen to another application, another InduSoft project, it's still not going to open unless I put in the password correctly. So you can do that for any screen, file, worksheet, symbol that you might have in your application inside your project. Or if you want to do that and just encrypt all the files in your project, you can go to the Home tab on the ribbon, click Verify, And there's an option on the verify menu called set password for all files. If you have a current password set, you would put the current password in. Otherwise, you'll put in a new password. And what this will do is it'll go through your entire project, all the files you've created, screens, symbols, worksheets, anything you've created in your project, reports, recipes, and encrypt those using this password. So if you want to do one file or individual files, you'll right-click on the file and set a password. If you want to do all the files in a project, then click verify, click set password for all files, and set it all at once. So now I'm going to hand it off to Chuck. Chuck's going to talk a few minutes about IT security, and again, sort of focused on user group management as well.
Thank you, Larry. So I'm going to give you an overview of the best practices for strong IT security. And IT security is focused on protecting you from data loss, data destruction, financial theft, intrusion and theft of internal resources, and unauthorized access. We focus our efforts on user training, defining policies at the domain level, setting user account security, managing security account groups, defining policies for remote access security, email security, machine security, perimeter and network device security. So let's start with the user training. We need to train our users to be aware of the greatest risks that are facing us today, primarily from socially engineered malware, things that are trying to get their cooperation in infecting the network. An invoice from a company that you don't recognize, click here, open the document, enable macros, those sorts of transactions. Also, socially engineered fraud, where the bad guys research your company, determine the CEO's email address, either spoof it or register a domain similar to it, and send an email to the CFO saying, we need an emergency wire transfer to this bank account. We've had a project emergency. The traditional phishing things, as well as trying to implement white hat testing to pretend to be a bad guy to see if the training has worked and the users are paying attention, or if in fact we still have more training to do. We also work to educate our users on password security. Password security is super important. Too many people use passwords that they can't remember and use sticky notes, or they use passwords that are too easy to guess. And in brute force attacks, which is a common approach, length matters. The longer the password, the harder it is, the longer time it takes. And it's based on the search space raised to the power of the length of the password. And a search space is how many choices there are for a given character. If it's a numeric character, there's 0 to 9, so there's 10 choices. And a 3-character password from 000 to 999, the length is 3, so it's 10 raised to the third power, or 1,000 possibilities. So that's kind of the essence of how it goes. An alpha character would have 26 possibilities. If it was upper and lowercase, it would have 52, that sort of thing. Password padding can also help immensely. Just putting a series of repeating characters at the end of a fairly simple password to make it longer can make it relatively easy to remember and more secure than the onerously complex password you see there below the D0G ... password. Something else you need to avoid is the 20 most common actual passwords that were stolen from various users. There are a number of sites on the web where you can get the top 20, the top 100, and we have seen exploits where the bad guys just iterate through these top 20 or top 100 passwords looking for people who are perhaps being a little too cavalier about the choice of password. User policies can help you enforce this by setting rules, domain-enforced rules or network-enforced rules for password age, length, and complexity, much the way the InduSoft product enforces them there. We generally recommend 8 or more characters and at least 2 of either upper and lowercase letters, numerals, or special characters. We also strongly recommend account lockout policies to lock the account after several failures and lock it for a meaningful length of time or forever, requiring engineer intervention to unlock the account. We also recommend screen lock policies to lock all screens after a short period of inactivity to obscure any confidential information while someone may have stepped away to lunch. User security involves making sure that each individual has a unique account. We we shy away from sharing accounts between unique human beings. And also, we recommend using two-factor authentication for the more secure applications, financial access, banking, those sorts of transactions. Test and production account management should ensure that the individual user accounts for both of those environments should use different accounts. So 2 accounts for a single human being, one in the test environment, one in the production environment. And those should be reviewed and disabled frequently to make sure that as people leave the organization or roles change, that is handled appropriately. We also agree with Larry on the security groups approach, thinking about this from a functional group membership perspective, putting together a security group for HR, for finance, for development, and then putting the individual users in the groups and granting the permissions to the group. That way it makes it much easier to manage. It's so much more straightforward to make sure we don't have an error or omission in the security infrastructure. We also require regular review because people's roles do change. And at the modern network level, it's typically domain security, Active Directory in a Windows environment. Be very careful of being too cavalier about local machine-level administrator accounts, something that grants administrator rights to a local machine on that domain, because those things are hard to manage centrally, often forgotten, and can frequently be used as a threat vector. We also avoid granting named user-level access to any network resources. Grant the group, not the individual, and then make sure the individual is in the appropriate group. Group membership, as I mentioned, needs to be reviewed periodically, and review and disable membership as part of termination checklists and quarterly review. With remote access security, most networks do allow people to come in from the outside. Limit the number of remote access solutions that you will tolerate on your network, and be very specific to the users. We can use this one or these 2 and no more. If you're using remote desktop, configure a remote desktop gateway because that gives additional layers of security with the Microsoft Remote Desktop connections. And restrict user-installed remote access tools. Don't let someone install LogMeIn or some other solution on your network if that's not your tool, because then anything that becomes a security risk in that tool may not be brought to your attention and may be a threat opportunity. Limit your VPN-enabled users as well. Obviously, they have broader access to network resources, and you need to make sure they have a compelling reason, and that when that reason expires due to change of role or what have you, that they have that access revoked. Email security, everyone today has spam filtering, but that's critically important to have a good, reliable vendor for that not only does spam filtering, but also virus filtering and basically spoofing protection to help protect against some of the more common financial frauds today. It's also a good idea to have multiple antivirus solutions as the email is coming into the building, being scanned through the spam filtering, being scanned at the firewall, being scanned at the desktop, to make sure that it's very thorough. Many threats today are email-borne, unfortunately. Consider using 2 email addresses and/or usernames, one for trivial web accounts, routine things, your Yahoo Mail, another one for your hyper-secure situations like your financial access, banking, trading, things of that nature. Machine security is incredibly important, and the most essential focus there is to make sure they're properly patched. Most of the security vulnerabilities at the machine level are known to the operating system manufacturers, and they release patches. We just need to make sure you're working with a vendor that is going to assure that those patches are tested and applied in a timely fashion. We also recommend local full disk encryption, especially for laptops. Traveling users, you lose a laptop, you don't want to have to lose sleep over what was on that and how secure those passwords were. Full disk encryption will help you sleep at night. I mentioned client AV at the desktop. It needs to be centrally managed so that you know your definitions are current, and if there's any unremediated threat, the client will report to the central administrator that there's a problem that needs human intervention. Also, through central administration, we can make sure they're scheduled and on-access AV scans, and make sure that those corporate preferences are governed and the users can't override them, or if they can only override them for a short period of time. At the perimeter, we recommend you get a great firewall. Make sure it's configured properly, and sometimes that's beyond the scope of the internal IT users. You might have to hire an expert in that particular firewall to configure it properly. But leverage the perimeter security features of that device with AV scanning, intrusion detection, web reputation blocking, where your users are unable to go to websites that have become infected or sketchy in their reputation. Advanced persistent threat detection, sort of the day zero vulnerability sorts of things. And then more and more of the modern firewalls do data loss prevention scanning, which is outbound traffic scanning, looking for loss of social security numbers, account numbers. You can set up heuristics and pattern matching to understand what type of data loss would be important to your organization, and either stop it cold or log it if it exceeds a certain number of outbound transactions per hour. Again, centralized reporting is very valuable here, so that your IT partner or your internal IT department can keep an eye on things for you. At the network device level, all of these devices typically will have firmware that control how they operate, and as security flaws are made available there, the individual manufacturers release firmware updates. They can also correct bugs and flaws in the code as well. So make sure your firmware is updated regularly. Set up VLANs to segregate traffic of different sensitivities into different LANs, isolating one from the other. And if you have SNMP devices on your network that are enabled, change the passwords and lock down SNMP host addresses to only known servers. As far as advanced options, block everything outbound unless its use is specifically known and authorized. That obviously is a little bit more of an onerous task, but it really does provide a great deal of protection from things that might pop up on your network. Also, if you're very focused on avoiding exploits from people who might be guests in your environment, lock down the switch ports to only known MAC addresses, which ties a physical device or computer to that switch port. That prevents someone from taking the wire and borrowing it to perform an exploit on your network. Additional security resources here for your review afterwards, and again, as Larry mentioned, these will be published, so I'll move on to the next slide. And Capstone works, as Larry mentioned, we've been helping him since 2010. We are the friendly, proactive, worry-free IT company. We provide flat-rate managed IT services since 2006, and we've been serving the small and medium business market in Central Texas now since 2001. With that, I'll turn it back to Larry.
All right, thanks, Chuck. So a few other additional resources. Click on it, from an InduSoft perspective, there is something we call the help manual. Comes with InduSoft Web Studio, also known as a technical reference manual. This is the primary tool that you'll use to get help using the InduSoft product. The website has an enormous amount of data. I mentioned the case studies earlier, but there's also technical notes, application notes. You can access the chat in our community forum on our website. There's sample applications, Sim of the Week, consulting services. We also have training on our website. We have recorded training broken up into modules that you can take at your leisure. We also have on-site training as well as training that we give local in our various geographies around the world. So take advantage of those resources if you need them. So now we have a little bit of time for question and answer. So on the tool, the WebEx tool, you have a chat section. You also have a Q&A section. So if you have some questions, you can throw them into the chat or throw them into the Q&A, and we'd be happy to answer them. Give you guys a few moments to put those in there if you want. So the gray screens that you see on your screen are just me bringing up the various chat and Q&A sessions. So we have one question about LDAP, and an answer to that question, I'll have to close these other windows for a minute. When we integrated to the Active Directory in InduSoft Web Studio, we got a ton of groups, and we have a ton of users. You may not want all of these users and groups imported into the InduSoft Web Studio application when you do your integration. Well, that's actually manageable. One of the settings we didn't talk about inside the Active Directory integration was the ability to define Active Directory queries to basically create a much smaller set of data that you want to use when going out and collecting stuff from the Active Directory server itself. So if you wanted to create a custom query, you could basically put in the user and password of a directory server name of a user that has permission to the directory server, and then using basically queries defined within the LDAP protocol, you can narrow down the list of users or list of groups that you want to collect. By default, we collect all of the users and groups that we find in the user tree of the Active Directory. Specifically, we go find users that have an object class equal to user and groups that have an object class equal to group. So again, without getting into the mechanics of Active Directory or directory services, these are features of the directory service that people can leverage if they want to minimize the list of users or list of groups that we import. Just know that the default is to go get everything. But if you don't want the default, if you want something different, then you can do that using the LDAP security server settings. So we appreciate that. We appreciate that question. So back to the WebEx for a minute. Let's see if we have any others. Any others on the chat? So no other questions. So I do appreciate your time. I do want to mention that if you have comments about this webinar or comments about other webinars or topics that you might want to see covered, then you can contact us through a number of different ways. The easiest way is probably via email, and you'll see that depending on which office you want to contact, the US, Brazil, or Germany office, there's an info@ email address. So if you want to contact us at info@indusoft.com and tell us that you want to have a webinar topic on something, then let us know. We also have our support email address there, as well as the various websites for English, Portuguese, and German language websites. The various phone contact numbers that you can use to contact us. We also have dedicated phone numbers for licensing and support. So if you want to contact us to ask a question about licensing or to activate a license, then feel free to call us. Or if you want to call us for support, then we offer break-fix support for anyone using InduSoft Web Studio by calling us or emailing the support at InduSoft Web Studio or InduSoft.com address, or getting on the chat and chatting with us. So again, appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars. This webinar has been recorded. It will be posted to the website in a few days. So if you come back and go to the webinar section of our website, then you'll be able to find a recorded version of this if you want to share it with your friends. Again, thank you for your time.